This podcast contains detailed plot spoilers, adult language, and mature themes. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to a podcast of Rare Antiquities, episode 16. Today we will be discussing the psychological drama/thriller Jacob's Ladder, starring Tim Robbins. My name is Harry, and I'll be your host for today's show.
And my name is Geoff, and I will co-host today's show.
How are you doing today, Geoff?
Doing great, man. Doing great. Looking forward to digging into this one, and yeah, always look forward to our shows. So doing good.
Good to know. I guess as per usual, as we have done with all the other podcasts, I believe last time you said you did not see this before, but do you have any memories or preconceptions of what this movie was or what it actually was about?
A little bit incorrectly. I think that this movie was misrepresented to me by other people or the media or whatever. I thought this was just sort of a low-rent, bizarre horror movie, and as you know, that's not really in my wheelhouse, so completely ignored this one over the years. I like Tim Robbins. I'm a fan of his, but just my perception of it, didn't create any interest, so didn't seek it out, and went in fresh.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, similar. I think I was in the same boat. I always thought that this was more of a horror movie in the past, and it's always been kind of on my watch list because people keep talking about, you got to see Jacob's Ladder. It's a movie that it's pretty good, and you should check it out, and it's got some layers there, so it'll be interesting to see if it lives up to the hype today. But you mentioned Tim Robbins. You like him. That was going to be my next question. So what do you think of him as an actor? Is there any outstanding work that he's done that you particularly enjoy, or anything about him that I haven't mentioned? Is there anything you want to delve into there?
Well, okay, this is probably low-hanging fruit, but, The Shawshank Redemption's a pretty good movie. I really enjoy that one, and I thought he delivered a very good performance there. So, obviously that, he's a working guy. He's been in a lot of stuff, but that's a standout for me off the top of my head. I thought he did a good job in that film. When you get a movie like that from, like some Stephen King stuff, which is more dramatic, not horror, tends to be a little bit overly sentimental, which that movie can be. And that can be a difficult place to put an actor in and still sort of sell the drama of it. And that's, one of my favorite aspects of that film is he's able to rein in some of the sentimentality there and some of the melodrama and sell a pretty human story there. So, that's kind of my comment on Tim Robbins. I always look forward to seeing him in stuff, and he's never set me wrong, that's for sure.
That's interesting. Yeah, Tim Robbins has not been somebody I've watched in a lot of roles. I mean, Shawshank being the most notable of his works there. I remember him in his bit part in Top Gun. I don't know if you recall, he's just one of those side guys. I think it was Merlin from the top of my head. That was his wing name or code name or whatever it was. He was the guy who played Merlin, and he was really young there. I think that was one of his earliest roles. And I remember him in Mystic River, and I guess he's that weirdo guy in War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise. But aside from that, I didn't really think of much off the top of my head. And the strange thing is when I went onto the internet for some research on Tim Robbins himself, he hasn't really done a lot of other major roles. I think he was in Bull Durham in the 80s and, some other kind of lesser known films that maybe we can get into in the future. But there's nothing really in particular that stands out for me. And I guess he's kind of gone on to do other things. He still acts. He just doesn't do a lot of work in the last decade. He's just kind of been a movie every other year, and they're kind of low budget indie movies or something like that. So
now that we talk about it, he was the antagonist in that film Arlington Road, which came out.
Bring that one up.
Yeah, it just came in, obviously, because I'm a big Jeff Bridges fan. I want to give him a big old bear hug one of these days. Not the greatest movie, but good performances from the two leads there. Really interesting. Those two playing off each other for that film. And Tim Robbins was real good, slow burn type of performance there, lots going on, but, obviously didn't know exactly what was going on with the character there. And Jeff Bridges might have hammed it up a touch in that film, but I'll forgive him. So
anything else you want to talk about before, or should I get into the synopsis here?
I'm looking forward to digging into this one, so let's do it. All
right. So I just wrote this out this afternoon, so haven't had time to practice it, so bear with me here. So meet Vietnam vet Jacob Singer. Born in Bowie, Arizona, 59 confirmed kills, 2 silver stars, 4 purple hearts, a Distinguished Service Cross, and a Medal of Honor. He was trained to kill, period. And he can eat things and make a billy goat puke. And in the end, all he wanted was something to eat. Oh, oops, wrong movie character. Except after actually getting something to eat at a drop zone in Vietnam, Jacob and his platoon soon find themselves starting not to feel well as the enemy approaches. As his platoon seizes up, goes crazy, and drops like flies, Jacob finds himself on the other side of a bayonet, stabbed by the enemy. Jacob awakes in the not-too-distant future in a New York subway. He lives with his girlfriend Jezzy, divorced from his wife Sarah and his 3 sons, one of whom died before the war. As he lives on after returning home from the war, Jacob starts seeing disturbing images and hallucinations. He's seeing faceless people, demonic images, and even a monster fornicating with his girlfriend on the dance floor at a party. All the while, it seems someone is following him, and others are trying to run him down with their car. Are these signs of PTSD, or are they for real? What makes matters worse is even his psychiatrist was killed, blown up in a car, it seems. As Jacob unravels and deals with these events, his body seems to be breaking down slowly, but he meets up with his platoon buddy, who was also seemed to be going through the same issues as Jacob. He sees demons and feels like he is going to hell. Then all of a sudden his friend is killed, his car also blown up. At the funeral, his other platoon buddies share similar experiences. So they figure out, or guess, that the military did something to them, and they contact a lawyer who later backs out as their military's files show that they were never in combat and were actually discharged for psychological reasons. Something strange is happening to Jacob, and this is confirmed again as strangers attempt to kidnap and kill Jacob for talking too much. But Jacob manages to escape, but is injured. At the hospital, Jacob finds that this hospital is messed up, as this hospital is dilapidated and horrific images surround him. It's just another dream, maybe. Jacob finds himself later in a hospital room, and his friend and chiropractor Louis discharges him and gives him strange advice about hell, saying, "The only part that burns in hell is part of you that won't let go of your life." You know, standard Hallmark get-well-soon card stuff. Jacob later is approached by a military chemist, Michael, who admits that him and his platoon were given an experimental drug to increase violence and aggressiveness, and that his platoon killed each other in the experiment. Throughout these events, Jacob goes back and forth between his event in Vietnam to his life with Jezzy and to his former life with Sarah and his kids. Knowing about the experimental drug, he then wants to go back to his wife and the kids' home. While there, he remembers the advice Louis gave him, and he meets his dead son. His son leads him up the stairs, baked in warm sunlight, and we fade to see Jacob lying in a stretcher in a medical tent in Vietnam as he just passes away. The end. So, Jeff, that was very high-level plot summary here. Probably doesn't do the actual events in the movie complete justice, because a lot of details are left out. But just based on that, your initial thoughts.
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't do it justice. There is a lot more going on here, and it is difficult to summarize in a coherent way what's going on. So, to kind of take the plot synopsis and try to be honest with the movie, you just can't. I don't think that, if I'm just listening to that without having watched the movie, I'm probably going, okay, so it's a dude with PTSD, and at the end he dies, and it was all a dream. No thanks. I'm not interested. But as we'll find out, that's very high level. That's not a representation at all.
All right, so how about I hit you with some trivia before we get into the nitty-gritty as per usual. So this movie was released in 1990 by Trimark Pictures and Carlico Entertainment. This movie was directed by Adrian Lin. He hasn't done a lot of movies in terms of direction. I think his most famous movie that he's ever directed is the well-known thriller Fatal Attraction. So I think that's probably what he is most famous for, but he hasn't done that much work, which is interesting. But I thought I'd hit you with a question before I get into more trivia. I'm pretty sure you're aware, but if you're not, we'll just go over it. Do you know the actual meaning or the biblical meaning of Jacob's Ladder?
I do not. No.
Okay, so this is pretty much the giveaway of the movie itself. So this is more of initial is a Hebrew name, and it really means ladder to heaven. So it's a colloquial name, the connection between the earth and the heaven that the biblical patriarch Jacob dreams about during his flight from his brother Esau. And this is in the book of Genesis. I mean, there's even in Judaism, again, the ladder is signified it's when Jewish people are in exile and they would suffer before the coming of the Messiah. So these are the kind of things, I think that's really the, pardon my pun, the genesis of what the hidden meaning behind the story is for the people who don't know the terms of Jacob Ladder, at least the biblical terms. So I didn't even know until the end. I did some research, so I'm not well versed in biblical studies here. So for me, I didn't even know that either. So I'm with you, but thought that was interesting. In terms of the actors, there are many, many actors who actually went out of their way and sought out to play the main role. Al Pacino, Richard Gere, Dustin Hoffman being notable names there. Tim Robbins did eventually was the one who got it. And the weird thing is I think Adrian Lyne, wisely or unwisely, but sometimes it's a good thing, he went with a little bit more of an unknown. This was Tim Robbins' first main feature film as a lead. He's done other things, small bits and comedies and stuff like that. So he's really proud of this film because he was able to stretch out in terms of dramatic material instead of just comedic material. And that proved to everybody around him that he was capable of performing in movies such as this. You also get to see some earlier performances. Early on you see Ving Rhames. That's one of his earlier roles. You see one of the 80s side leading guys, Eric LaSalle, in this. I think he is most notably known from ER fame, but he's in here too. This is one of his earlier roles. I found this kind of funny in the trivia is they actually hired a military advisor to give all the actors a 5-day boot camp. For what? I have no idea because they really didn't utilize any. There was really no military action sequence in this movie that was stand out. It's just a bunch of guys standing around and dropping like flies, as we'll go over. The box office, this made $26 million US domestically. Unfortunately, I was unable to find what the budget is or what it did overseas, but I would assume the $26 million back in 1990 was still a fairly decent profit for a movie like this, especially if you didn't have to pay big bucks to a big name actor. This movie had mixed critical reception, still to this day, so it'll be interesting to see where we fall in terms of this movie. And one of the main things that this movie has influenced is the horror video game / movie franchise Silent Hill. The creators of Silent Hill really looked at Jacob's Ladder as an influence in creating their franchise.
How interesting.
Yeah. And then I think M. Night Shyamalan or someone behind the creative team of The Sixth Sense also mentioned that this was a minor influence for that movie as well. So, yeah. So that does it for the trivia. Any comments you got there? No,
that's interesting to hear what it influenced. I'm aware of the Silent Hill video games. I've never played them, but that's interesting that it's had some influence in the sort of the thriller genre, as it should, I think.
Okay. You want to just pop right into the movie?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so as mentioned in the synopsis, this opens up in Vietnam, and we have Marine or a platoon brigade waiting at what appears to be a temporary base or a drop zone. I guess they're waiting for the enemy either to launch an attack or for them to kind of come to them, and then they'll deal with them. And again, as I mentioned here, you see the noticeable B-list actors here, Ving Rhames, Eric LaSalle. You see the enemy, or at least someone saying the enemy is coming. But then when that happens, in the action, you think the action is going to start into this big action set piece. All the platoon, the Marines, they start dropping. Some of them are having seizures. Others are going crazy while the attack happens. And here you get some violent images, of war and death. You see guys with limbs blown off, such as that. But it's no Saving Private Ryan type of visuals, but you still get a sense of what's happening. And you see other guys just, you see in other movies, just zone out, through stress like PTSD or stress disorder, not post-traumatic. So you see that kind of stuff happen here. And the sequence ends with the main character, Jacob, who again played by Tim Robbins. He gets stabbed with a bayonet, and then he immediately wakes up from his dream. So just before we move on, what did you think about this entire opening sequence here, Jeff? Was it effective? Did it set the tone of what this movie will be addressing? What are your initial thoughts here?
My initial thoughts were, I didn't really know what to make of what was going on. It had an ominousness to the opening there. I was, sort of shades of Apocalypse Now. I think there's a shot with a helicopter there, but there isn't really a lot of sound. It's just sort of this ominous overtone going on. So, I appreciate that. It was interesting because, at first I'm like, shit, that's some bad weed that these guys were just smoking. And he wakes up. And I thought, okay, is this a dream? How much of that was real and how much was a dream? So I think right off, I was pleasantly surprised again, because, I didn't do any advance research on the film. I didn't read any synopses or even the Netflix 3-line blurb. I didn't read. I just started watching. So I had no idea what I was getting into. And yeah, it drew me in right away. I thought it was a good scene. I actually had the thought right away when they realized that they're under attack. You can't really see who they're fighting. And I was like, it just occurred to me, I'm like, are they fighting other American soldiers? Are they fighting each other? It was just a thought that sort of popped in there. So,
oh, interesting.
Yeah, interesting thread maybe to pick up later.
Yeah, I didn't mind. I like the sort of set piece here. I agree with you. You get the shots of the helicopters. I liked some of the cinematography that was happening here. And I liked that you really didn't get a sense of seeing a big set piece. You just see all this crazy shit happening before the action starts. And then you just see the kind of like in between action that's happening. Guys who are injured, guys who are dead, you hear gunshots, you hear bombs going off. And then you see, Jacob getting stabbed there and then wakes up. So I thought it was a pretty effective opening for myself. So then Jacob, from this dream or vision, he wakes up and he's on a subway car in New York. Subway car is pretty empty. Interesting, you see signs of like hell, like this is hell, and other kind of imagery. And he's trying to talk to people. He's talking to this lady. She won't talk back. Nothing's happening. The weird thing here is he gets out as he's exiting the train car. He sees a bum sleeping under a pile of clothes. And as he takes a little closer look at him, this guy's got a grotesque tail tucked away. Yeah. At least you hope it's a tail.
It's pretty good articulation if it wasn't a tail, that's for sure.
Yeah, that kind of control. He should be, in the porn industry raking up the money. He shouldn't be a bum. So,
hey, man, in Japan, that guy would be a hit.
Or in Korea, if it had a tail.
That was weird, man. I don't know if you're going to keep going. I wanted to stop and say, like, the whole subway scene or sequence, I really, really liked a lot. Like, I saw the dude with the tail, and I'm like, okay, shit just got bananas, and it's like 3.5 minutes into this movie. So, but I thought some of the imagery was great. Like you said, the signage there. I think it was a "Drugs or Hell" sign. Again, like we could pick up right at the end of the film was neat. But I was like, man, is he on some shit or? What's going on? It was super creepy, man. And the train that goes by, he has to kind of dodge that train. Well, I guess you haven't really gotten to that point, but
it's right here. Like he gets, almost gets hit by a train. And as the train passes, you see some weird, I guess people looking at him. It goes by so quickly, but the last guy in the last train car looks at him, almost looks like a faceless man.
Yeah.
So again, here, this opening sequence here is very strange and weird and interesting. All right, so let's move on. So we cut to him going home, and here you first meet his girlfriend, Jesse, and you cut back quickly again to another scene, the aftermath of him being stabbed. And we'll see that throughout this movie is certain events in the movie here keep switching back and forth to his flashbacks, like where he is at in Vietnam after the stabbing event. So here in Vietnam, he's asking again for help. And then again, as soon as he asks for help, because he sees some another platoon arrive or something like that, then we cut back before he is rescued. He's back at home again. And you're meant to think that he's dreaming. He starts looking through some old pics and you realize he had a previous relationship and a boy who seems to have died. And then after some scenes at work, we find out he has back problems. And we cut to him getting an adjustment with his chiropractor, Louis, who's played by Danny Aiello. And as his neck gets the Cavill Superman on Zod treatment, he has another quick flashback of the Marines finding him in Nam, and they say he is still alive. And then he flashes right back to Louis after his neck was adjusted, and he calls Louis an angel. So what did you think of all of these scenes? Jesse, his girlfriend, the boy, he has a boy who seems to like these scenes. Are they giving the movie away a little bit here at this stage?
I mean, it's hard to say if they're giving the movie away. I mean, I guess, like in hindsight, yeah, they're definitely giving the movie away at this point. I think I had some intimations at what was going on, when he's with the chiropractor. I'm like, that's one hell of a chiropractor. And with sort of the halo behind him, and he says, you're an angel. And I'm like, okay, well, they're definitely giving this guy the guardian angel treatment. And I did start asking, some of the questions like is he in hell right now, or maybe he's in he's in purgatory, with sort of the flashing back and forth. I was like, okay, maybe he's still in Nam and he's dreaming of his life at home, perhaps, maybe it's PTSD, but they're laying on pretty thick with the biblical stuff, with the biblical names, the prophets, Jezebel, It's a little bit overt, and it led me in the direction of asking the questions like, where is he right now? Because I was like, I'm not sure that he's actually at home, dreaming. I was thinking like, maybe, especially with, right after the subway, things are looking maybe a little obvious, but I don't think it was too much for me. I was intrigued and I was asking the questions, but I didn't have the answers yet. So it was okay. It's a tough line. That's a tough line.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is a tough line, but yeah, I did initially, like the movie, we'll get into it, starts to throw some curveballs to re-ask the question, what exactly is happening? But at this point here, even on my first watch, I was already saying, okay, is this guy dead?
Yeah.
Like, is he, as you said, he's in some kind of purgatory? Is he in heaven? And this is his consciousness fading away or something like that. Especially, as you said, with the subway and you see those kind of, demonic or ghosts or whatever, they're faceless people. I was going, okay, what the fuck's happening? Am I already getting a hint of the conclusion? So we could go back and touch on this a little later, but yeah, it was a bit on the nose. I think maybe they could have, in hindsight, once we get to the end of the film, we could talk about it. Maybe they could have played these scenes a little differently. I think maybe a director with a bit more of a skilled hand could have done something slightly different here. But anyways, let's move on. So after he leaves the chiropractor, he's walking home. And of course, the dumb fuck is in the alley and car starts chasing him down and he manages to dodge out of the way. And again, as the car passes, you see another grotesque face in the car staring at him. And then he actually, from this point here, he goes to try and find his psychiatrist at a hospital where I'm assuming he's getting treated for PTSD. But the nurse there hasn't heard of him. And she's a charming bitch. And the weird thing is, as she kneels down, her nurse hat falls off, and you see she has kind of some deformity, horns, or some kind of weird shit on her head. And it freaks him out, and he runs in to find his doctor, where he thinks his doctor is, only to find some kind of other meeting happening in that room, group meeting, and this guy says, oh, his doctor had died earlier. So at this point here, now you're seeing more images, again, like another grotesque face in the car. You get this nurse who seems to have some kind of real demonic deformity on her head. Can't find his doctor. He's died. What does this signify to you at this point? Again, is this right on the nose? Are you feeling that they're already, giving away their cards?
Well, I mean, I think there's kind of two places here, and I think that the movie's struggling to kind of reconcile two things here. So when he's talking to the nurse, and she's just being awful to him, like she can't wait to just go on her fucking lunch break, and she wants this loser to take a hike, and he's just trying to get help. So I thought it was a good scene. He's trying to keep it cool, right? Keep it wrapped up. And she's just not helping. And she hasn't heard of him. She's like, who's this doctor? And we see the horns. So at that moment, it was kind of working for me, because either he's losing it, because he's kind of freaking out at this moment. So he might be hallucinating. It might be a symptom of his PTSD, or, it could just as easily be, he's in hell or he's in purgatory, and this is just sort of part of the labyrinth that he's going to have to navigate. So I was okay with that. But then as he runs through the hospital, he finds his doctor's old office, and he talks to the doctor who's having some kind of group meeting in there. And that guy knows all about the previous doctor, and he died in an explosion. His car blew up or something. Yeah. Right. So then I'm like, okay, well, the guy was just talking to the nurse, and she doesn't remember that doctor, and she's said she's been there forever. She would have remembered a dude getting blown up in his car. So that's why I say, like, it's hard, like the movie's not doing a good job of like reconciling two things. I'm like, well, she didn't remember the dude. So like, who's the nurse? Like, did he hallucinate that whole interaction there, or what? So
yeah, I mean, those are really your two options. Is he just like losing it and hallucinating, and then part of the conversation is real, part of the conversation isn't? Or, as you said, is he in some kind of path or purgatory, or where his brain is starting to lose these connections? Like, was that psychiatrist? This is like another, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind kind of scenario where things are kind of disappearing. His brain connections are getting lost through the process of death, that transition to death. That's kind of what I thought initially. That doctor was a packet in his brain, and it's gone because that connection got destroyed. as part of the transition to death. That was my first instinct. So interesting. We don't know really for sure at this point, because really it could be either of those two things, right?
Yeah.
So either a conspiracy, or he's going crazy, or he's dying. Right?
Well, and that was the other thing. Like, is there a conspiracy going on here? But I was less compelled by the mystery here and more kind of confused by it.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a little bit more, it's not, I think a little bit later, some seeds are planted where it gets a bit more interesting. At this point, it's a bit more confusing. So now, at this point, he goes to a party, very 80s, with his girlfriend, Jezzy. Things start to get a little bit more weird here. I can't remember, but I think he either sees a cow's or a goat's head in the fridge, all wrapped up. He gets his palm read, and the palm reading lady said he's already dead. And then he sees some kind of demonic guy shaking his head violently. That was a very disturbing image. And then he sees his girlfriend, Jezzy, on the dance floor do the demonic doggy. And the demon, I guess in the end, gave her the facial from hell, literally. So these are really disturbing images, and he freaks out, drops on the dance floor, and he awakes later at home. But just this sequence at the party here, there's a lot of interesting and cool, even though it's disturbing imagery here. I think this is a little bit more I enjoyed this sequence a little bit more in terms of the thriller, horror, violent imagery that we get to see in the movie. So I did enjoy this sequence here.
I was uncomfortably aroused at the dance floor, demon doggy style. It was more disturbing to note my reaction to the scene, I think, than anything else. So, to be serious, it was interesting. I like the idea of the palm reader. It was a little on the nose, so I think that. But if they had kind of backed off of, she's like, "Oh, it says you're already dead." She says it with a touch of humor, right? Mm-hmm. Like she's joking. Whereas, as the audience, we're like, okay, obviously. Yeah, like that's the case. Like this motherfucker is dead. But if they had a few more or changed some of the dialogue there, so it was a little like on the surface, it wasn't so suggestive of the obvious. But later on, maybe being able to interpret, like if you're looking back and say, well, she said this and it turned out to be true, as a fortune teller would hope to be. That might have helped that. But I thought it was neat. Like he opens the fridge, and there's like a cow's head in there, like wrapped up all in plastic. That was really creepy. Mm-hmm. It was really creepy. And the demon doing his girlfriend there, that got weird pretty quickly. And
I really was kind of even more disturbing than that. I was kind of disturbed. And you see that in more modern horror movies today. So it's interesting to see how far back this type of image goes, where the guy is violently shaking his head so fast, right? He's snapping and doing that. I don't recall a lot of horror movies doing that back in the late 80s, early 90s. You see that kind of more prevalent in today's type of horror movies. These kind of weird, I don't know which word. It's so fast and disjointed, mixed together. It's unnatural. For example, you could say The Ring or The Grudge, or these weird things where you see people crawl and move in very horrific, unnatural means. And you see it here with this guy shaking his head very violently and snapping. So I enjoyed seeing that. It did creep me out a little bit. I did enjoy the way this sequence was filmed. So that's something that is a strong point of the movie for me, is this sequence here. But let's get back to the home. So when he wakes up from this, his girlfriend's pretty pissed off for Jezzy for embarrassing him at the party like that. But when he wakes up, all of a sudden he has a fever. It's like one of those 106, 107 fever. And she calls a doctor and she says, oh, you better put him in a bathtub full of ice. And he's getting buried and drowned here in ice water to bring the fever down. He pulls through. But again, now here we have another flashback, and then we cut away, I guess, to the past. Or it's the past or his present. We're not really sure. His other life with Sarah, his previous wife, and his son and his other kids. And you get kind of a small sequence with them. You get to learn he has a relationship with, I guess he has 2 or 3 boys, but one specific boy, the boy who did die, played by Macaulay Culkin here. You get to see him have a small scene here. And then he quickly cut back to the tub where he wakes up. So what do you think of all this? Finally, you get the introduction with that other life with his wife and kids. So what's your thoughts here?
Well, right away, I was like, well, okay, hold the phone. What the fuck's going on? Like, that was one of the curveballs, perhaps, that you had referenced before, because he just wakes up in his old life, but it's the present. It's after Nam. Everybody, he's still with his wife. His son's alive.
But I don't know if it's after Nam.
Well, no, but he says, like, oh, I dreamt about I dreamt I was living with so-and-so from work, with Jesse from work. It was really strange, right?
Oh, yeah, you're right. It is after Nom.
So he's in his life, presumably, with his son alive after Nom, and he's woken up from this nightmare that he's had. And at first I'm buying it. I'm like, is he taking another sort of metaphorical step on the ladder? Like he was in Nom, and then, he took one step on the ladder, and this is sort of his life, which is better than Nom, but it's still kind of fucked up. His son is dead. He's living in a shitty apartment. His girlfriend's getting her ass tapped on the dance floor, and his brain's about to explode from a fever. And then like he takes another step, and here he is in his ideal life. So I kind of saw this progression at this point from, one step to the next. And this again, like kind of leads me as a viewer to think that, it's all spiritual at this point, right? That like none of it's really happening in physical reality. It's happening, to him spiritually as he's passing it, on to the next world, right? That's kind of what I'm thinking at this point.
I partially agree. I mean, that's definitely one way to look at it, and I think that's the definitive way to look at it. But I think, as I mentioned, and you just said it, this is the first curveball they kind of throw at you to say, okay, now what the fuck is happening here? Because is the real life with Jesse? Is the real life here? Is he dead? Is this all hallucinations? What's going on? And it could be any number one of these things. So I think at this point is for me is where it starts to get slightly more interesting, and then gets even more interesting, because the next thing that happens is he gets a call from an army buddy of his from Nam, and they go and meet, and his friend says he's having issues. He's going to hell. He's seeing demons and imagery and hallucinations. And then when he goes outside with his friend gets in the car and it blows up, killing him, and like his friend. And then he gets to the funeral, and he has these other army platoon buddies there, and he finds out that they're now seeing things. At least some of them are. And they start saying, okay, well, what the fuck's going on? Did the army do this to us? Did something happen over in Vietnam? And they want to find out what's happening. So they go to a lawyer, start an investigation. And here we get the second appearance from Costanza on a podcast of Rare Antiquities. So Georgie Boy, welcome back. And after the meeting, someone seems to be following Jacob right after their first meeting with the lawyer. So now that this seed has been planted, what do you think?
Well, okay, so at this point, I think that again, it's another curveball, but it feels like, okay, maybe this is reality, and everybody's hallucinating at this point. So yeah, did something actually happen to him? So it adds another piece. Like, is it perhaps some drug or something the army experimented on him? Is it the PTSD? Is it a spiritual experience? So it's just another thing on top. And I thought, and it was legitimate to me at that moment. Like, I didn't know what the answer was at this point. And I liked this. I liked this wrinkle when they're all at the wake. The platoon, and they're all together, and they start giving each other looks, and they realize they've all been having a similar experience. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, it was pretty cool. I mean, when they go to the lawyer and stuff, things start to just it kind of bogged down for me a little bit there. Like, they got to go talk to a lawyer to. I guess that's just for some exposition so the audience can kind of get into what they're trying to sell. But
yeah, they just really wanted to introduce the idea of a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it slows the movie down a bit more. I think they could have cut out all the lawyer scenes with Jason Alexander altogether, because I think pretty much the next scene right after that, the guys, all his platoon buddies call him and say, okay, well, we're backing out. And their lawyer says, yeah, there's no case because your guys backed out. But the interesting thing is the lawyer says that when he did his initial investigation, that these guys were discharged after war, for psychological reasons, after just war games in Thailand. They actually went to combat. So now that one seed gets turned upside down.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of interesting. But then the funny thing is right after that, he gets kidnapped.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you get the one thing that's kind of weird about this movie is I find it so far, what I'm not happy with is the pacing and the editing, because they're dropping one thing, then they drop another thing, then they drop another thing, and then they turn it. They don't give you a chance to kind of digest some of this information and to play off the strengths of some of these twists and turns that they're throwing in here. Because as soon as they say, oh, war games in Thailand, then he gets kidnapped right away. You don't have time to think about it. And so that would that tell the normal person who's watching this movie, oh, well, he is telling the truth. There wasn't war games in Thailand, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something's going on here. So, so just to finish the sequence, he does manage to escape the suits that have kidnapped him, and he gets injured. But what did you think now? Is this becoming an interesting thriller, or is this starting to become a bit of a convoluted mess here?
It's a little convoluted, but I mean, in my opinion, I think it's still pretty effective as a thriller. I see what you're saying. Like, it's not really giving you time to sort of digest the curveball, because another one got thrown at your head like right away, you know?
Yeah.
And you're right. It's like, okay, well, obviously something's going on because he just got kidnapped. But I went along with it. I mean, I'm looking one way, and then all of a sudden something hit me coming from the other direction. So I was off balance, you know, pretty much right from the moment, you know, which we had talked about, sort of the first curveball where he wakes up in his old life. And I've been off balance ever since. And that, you know, that's working for me. You know, I'm like, oh shit, psychological thriller. Like, I don't know what's going on. And it's kind of how I want to feel during a movie like this. I don't want to know what's going on. I don't want to know how to feel. I don't want too much time to examine what's going on, because I'm afraid that I'm going to figure everything out, and that's going to rob me of you know, the satisfaction of whatever the payoff's going to be at the end.
Yeah. See, the weird thing here is then, so we'll get into this with the next sequence, but I still feel that they played their hand too early in the film.
Mm-hmm.
I never, even at this point, because we gave it away with the plot synopsis, I felt at this point, even all of this really wasn't what was the truth. Like, I just was sticking to my instinct and what they portrayed initially, because they hung on to that for a little too long, that he was dead with all of these images. And we're going to get to another one now. Because immediately after this, as I said, they don't give you time to digest. It's just they keep whamming you at different points. But now, from a conspiracy, then now we're going back to, is he dead? Because he's going to go to the hospital, because Idris back by escaping these thugs in the car, gets to a hospital, and he's going, this must be the hospital of the damned, because as he's going more and more into the hospital, deeper and deeper into the depths, he sees more horrific imagery. Jezzy's there, he sees weird stuff there, people tortured, body parts lying, blood lying around everywhere. And then it's cutting away again to his life with Sarah and the kids after that, and he seems alive and okay. But then it gets back to him with Louis rescuing him again in the hospital. So again, I'm still feeling that this movie, the one bad thing about this movie is it's the pacing and the editing is not its strong point. Too much is happening too quickly. Yeah,
I think you know, as you said earlier, you know, perhaps a more skilled filmmaker is able to make some of these twists and turns work. I think, you know, what they're going for here from a editing and pacing perspective is to kind of just keep moving. Like, you're running through the maze and turning the corner and turning the corner and turning the corner, and you don't know what's coming, what's around the next corner, but you're just running like flat out because what's behind you is so horrible. And I think that's kind of what they're going for with these sequences, you know, back to back. So no, they're not letting you digest anything that's happening right now. I think they're doing that on purpose. Whether it works, you know, obviously it's working less for you, you know, for me. Yeah, I'm okay with it, but I think I have some of the same concerns as you do. It's, and I remember, you know, as I'm watching the movie, I'm like, okay, I can kind of tell that, you know, we're not watching a filmmaker at the top of his game here. You know, it's kind of just going on the strength of atmosphere and a good performance. So yeah, I guess I have to agree, but it's less of a problem for me. You know, it's not like booting me out of the movie or anything.
This is one very long sequence with him in the hospital, him waking up with a quick scene, like a 1-minute scene with him being in the hospital and Sarah and his kids visit. And then he's asking the question, am I dead? And then he comes back to Louis rescuing him. And then Louis takes him and says, the funny thing is the one thing I laughed at. He's saying, is this the Middle Ages? As his broken leg is being hung up from the thing. And he yanks him down, which would probably cause him a lot of pain. And then he says, time for you to get an adjustment, as he's going to do his hocus pocus Cairo magic on him.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty funny.
Because you're right. Like, hocus pocus Cairo magic is exactly what he did. And, you know, chiropractors all being witch doctors as it is. It was an interesting choice for the movie to make this guy a chiropractor.
Yeah, I think so.
You know, like it is tantamount to making him a medicine man.
Oh, and I agree with you. And the funny thing is here, he says we should all be burned at the stake. Or he's telling the doctors, you guys need to be burned at the stake. I'm a chiropractor.
Yeah.
Right? I wish they played that joke a bit more throughout the movie. I thought that would have been more interesting.
Maybe so.
But again, going back to this pacing and editing problem, the minute he rescues him from this hospital and discharges him, they cut back to him getting another adjustment. Jacob, he's at Louis' place or wherever that is. And now Louis, to me, here is where you definitely, in my opinion, 100% give the movie away. He tells him the story about someone talking about hell, and he then tells Jacob, if you are worried about dying, the only thing that burns in hell is the part of you that won't let go of your life. Something like that. It's just, you're going through this to free your soul. So if you're afraid and all that stuff, all you'll see is the devil tearing at your life. So in my opinion, here is you definitively telling the audience what's happening, this revelation, this quote.
Yeah, it certainly seems to be the case. There's no question there that, it's being pretty overt with what's happening. I did make a note, and it's sort of a subtle callback because he talks about, like what you said, the only thing that burns in hell is stuff you can't let go of. So, like the memories and whatnot, like that's what gets burned away. And that calls back to a scene earlier in the film when he first, like right back at the beginning, when he first wakes up with Jezebel and they're and his ex-wife had sent him the photos, and she takes them and she goes down to the basement and throws them in the incinerator, right? The photos representing all of his memories, and she's burning them away. So I thought it was kind of a cool callback without being too overt about it. Yeah, I thought it was kind of neat. I mean, yeah, it's a little...
Yeah, it's a neat callback. But again, when you say that gives it away completely.
Yeah, totally. Totally gives it away. Yeah.
And this is where I'm starting to have a problem. Well, I'm already having a problem with this movie, but from this point on, you tipped your hand early in my opinion. Maybe not enough, but now you're tipping your hand 3/4 of the, this is what, it's 75-80% of the movie done. And now they're going to throw another curveball. Because just as things seem clear, Jacob gets a call from a military chemist, a guy who's been following him, and he says he was part of a team creating mind-altering drugs to increase aggressiveness and anger in the Marines, and his platoon was the experiment. And then what happened was they started killing each other. That's what happened. Like his platoon, that's where we go back to the beginning, and you're saying he didn't see an enemy. The enemy was themselves. And you're getting this scene, but I found all of this pointless and empty at this stage. Because I found it weird that they would throw it in here, but I'm wondering if it's just last desperation of the filmmakers saying, oh, well, shit, where do we go from here? The movie's kind of done, but I gotta kind of keep the audience guessing somehow. Did you find this effective at all? I don't know. I was, again, it was a little bit too on the nose at the beginning, and then this Danny Aiello Louis quote about, letting go and all that stuff, and his cutting back and forth between his wife and his kids saying, am I dead? Am I dead? Am I dead? To me, it's quite obvious. And then you throw this in here.
It's a little late in the game to be throwing this guy in there. And I think I know why they did it, but well, I guess there's kind of two things. So, we're not quite jumping to the end yet, but, after the movie fades to black, we get, the public service message that flashes up on the screen, which was a total mistake by the filmmakers to do.
Yeah, I think so too.
Like this last bit here is supposed, I don't know if it's supposed to be comment on the Vietnam War and how the soldiers were treated. I mean, obviously there's been rumors and stories about different experiments on soldiers who were in service in Vietnam. I don't know what's been proven and not. I mean, they experimented with LSD and other psychedelics and things like that.
No. All they wanted was something.
What's that?
If movies have taught me anything, all Vietnam vets wanted was something.
Yeah, that's all they wanted, something to eat. Well, the reason why they wanted something to eat, dude, is because they were all stoned out of their goddamn minds, right? They just had major munchies.
Yeah, I guess
so. That's why. So it all fits in together.
I guess so.
So they kind of throw this in there, and that, like, okay, here's our Vietnam War commentary, and they lob in the Vietnam War commentary, and that was kind of all this was to me. But that being said, they also try to throw in some allegory here, which I thought was partially interesting because they called the drug the ladder. Mm-hmm. And, you talked about the biblical reference to Jacob's ladder, where, you think of a ladder going up, right? And that is kind of some of the messaging in the movie here is,
Your ascendance to heaven. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Climbing. And there's imagery, also, and some more imagery that we'll get to in the conclusion here where you're going up. But what was interesting is the drug was a ladder that goes down, right down into like the primal core psyche of man, like fear, paranoia, violence, anger. And I thought that was kind of a neat mirror, if you will, that he was on this drug and he went down the ladder to the very, very bottom, to hell, if you will, but inside, like the worst part of mankind, and had to kind of ascend all the way from the very, very bottom, up to the top. So, from that perspective, I had a little bit to chew on there. I thought it was kind of neat, but I think I have to agree with you that it's a pretty severe curveball at this point of the movie. I mean, maybe they could have sold this earlier in the film at some point.
I think so. I think instead of worrying about dealing with a lawyer, this guy could have come into the picture at that point.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
And it would give you a little bit more things to think about before, because I think they tipped their hand too early at what the real situation was happening here. The funny thing is until that public service announcement at the end, where they're talking about that drug BZ and the Pentagon denied using it on the troops and all that stuff at the end of the movie, which was a mistake anyways. I was wondering if initially was this even just part of his path, it didn't really happen to him. It's just something like he had to descend, as you talked about, when Michael, who's that chemist, talks to him and says, there was this drug and you're going down into the depths. I thought maybe because of the sins as a soldier and him killing, maybe he was going to hell, because all of this is horrific imagery. Nothing is nice here. So I thought that was a possibility, even though I didn't think that was really what was happening. But I thought maybe that's what they were trying to say, that this was really him descending into hell, not ascending into heaven. That's what the ladder meant. But then with that public service announcement at the end, this is their statement on what happened during the war, right? Their commentary. So they kind of threw that possibility out the window, what I was just talking about.
Yeah. It calls back to that image on the subway when he first wakes up. He sees that sign that says drugs are hell. And we have both. Right now we have drugs. He's possibly in hell, or they're trying to have their cake and eat it too here at this point. And that's unfortunately a mistake in a movie. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You got to pick one.
Yeah. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think much else happens here after his discussion with the chemist in that alley in that back alley, and his realization about this drug being used and all that stuff. Because I think he, at this point, with all this information, he just gets into a cab, wants to go to his family's house, with his wife, Sarah, where they were at with the kids. He arrives there to find nobody there, and he contemplates what's happening. He goes through his stuff, and then he sits down. He's all alone, and it's a dark house. And then he remembers the advice that we gave, saying he has to be prepared to let go and not be afraid to die. And the minute that happens, it becomes daylight around him. And all of a sudden, Macaulay Culkin, his dead son, is sitting at the bottom of the stairwell, and they go have a small conversation. They give each other a hug. His son says it's okay, and he takes him upstairs. And as it goes upstairs, it kind of fades away into warm sunlight, the cliche warm sunlight of them going into the heavens. It then cuts back to him being in Nam, showing him finally passing away and at peace. Am I correct? That's pretty much the next step after he finds out this information.
Yep, I believe that is correct.
Yeah, and that's the end of the movie. So how do you think this movie resolved itself there after that?
Well, I think it resolved itself, I don't know if I would say, satisfactorily, but, honestly, in the sense that, he's been dead dying the whole time. And, depending on how you want to interpret what's happening, I guess the movie kind of leaves it open to interpretation. Like what you said, these are parts of his brain just shutting down, and this is him just dying and fading away into oblivion. Or is this his journey from, the depths of, the worst parts of humanity and what he has to go through his trials in order to get to heaven? I mean, that's another interpretation. Is it just sort of a combination hallucination from these bad drugs that they were given? I don't know. I guess, the movie kind of leaves it up to you.
Yeah, up to the viewer.
And I'm okay with that.
I find it kind of weird that, if he was kind of in that transition from life to death, there was a sequence in his passing saying, okay, just hold on, before you die, we want to tell you that you were exposed to this drug.
Yeah.
It's part of your trial. So when I'm passing to the afterlife, am I going to get am I going to be explained like the secret recipe of KFC or something like that? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. You are. You get to learn one secret that nobody knows. It's like, okay, before you walk up, it's St. Peter at the pearly gates. Like, before you cross over, I'm just going to let you know that joint that you smoked in 8th grade had a little bit of weird shit in it. Okay, you're cool with that? Okay, come on in. That's all good.
Yeah, it was. I didn't enjoy this last piece here, this last curveball with the drugging and the army experiment and stuff like that. I know they introduced it in the first sequence of the movie with all those guys going crazy and seizing up and stuff like that, but there's something about this movie that just doesn't sit right with.
That particular piece it's not necessary.
Yeah.
You know, it throws an unnecessary wrinkle into it, and it muddies the waters, I guess. You know, I mean, I'm already trying to wrestle with what's going on. Throwing that on top of it doesn't really help. It didn't need it. You know, I know they tried to do some stuff with the imagery, but no.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of does it in terms of the main plot. So, Geoff, overall, now that we've gone through the movie, what worked for you, what didn't? For the most part, if I think of the strengths of the movie, great work with building the atmosphere. Again, I've talked about how the unsettling imagery at the start and throughout, we talked about the party scene there, the subway scene. Actually, there's another cool image in the subway. He's down underground and he's trying to climb the stairs, but the entrances are all fenced off. He can't get out, right? Yeah.
Which, he's not far enough along in his journey. He's trapped underneath. He's down in hell still. He can't get out. I thought was pretty cool. So there's items like this that really worked well for me. I mean, I was drawn into the mystery for a psychological thriller. I felt it was a little bit ahead of its time. I mean, I'm trying to think of other psychological thrillers prior to this. If you go back to the 80s and stuff, and maybe you've got some David Lynch stuff that you could refer to. I don't even know that David Lynch knows what the hell's going on in his movies. So this, you could still kind of like you can make logical sense. You don't need to make too many leaps to sort of interpret this movie in a satisfactory manner, which I kind of appreciate. A lot of psychological thrillers go way too far out there. Like I've mentioned David Lynch, like you don't know what's going on in his stuff. You can't interpret it because the stuff that's on screen doesn't give you enough. So you really got to go out there, and he does that on purpose, and I don't like it. There are other psychological thrillers that don't do enough. They just explain everything to you, straight up. So there is no room for interpretation. And I thought that's one of the main strengths here is I thought it struck the right balance between me interpreting, or being left with room to interpret, but still there's enough in the film that it sort of works narratively as a story. And if you just take it on the surface, it still works. So that worked for me. Tim Robbins, as we talked about, I thought he did a real solid job here. I mean, he's not, nothing groundbreaking here, but I thought he was a real good fit for the character. Just sort of a regular kind of guy who got drafted and had some bad shit happen to him. And I like the everyman kind of quality that we got from him. I thought he was good. Overall the performances. I liked his girlfriend. I don't know the actor's name, but Jessie was also pretty good. So yeah, it caught me sideways a few times. Definitely got problems, but there's some of the stuff that didn't work. I think we talked about, like the throwing in the stuff with the drug it's not necessary. If they had thrown that in earlier, maybe they could have woven that into the fabric of what's happening psychologically with this guy as maybe an earlier setup to why he's hallucinating, as another explanation. Maybe it's not PTSD. Maybe he's having, for lack of a better term, acid flashbacks, but it's kind of kicked to the end a little bit. So that part didn't really work for me. What about you?
It's interesting. I think the acting I'll start with the acting, was fairly solid. I mean, I agree with you in the sense that Tim Robbins being the everyman, if you put a more known actor at the time, such as Pacino or Dustin Hoffman, who were probably in their prime at that point, they would have kind of led this movie under a different path. Maybe it would have worked better, maybe not. But I thought Tim Robbins did a good job because he did play the everyman, as you mentioned. I thought the acting from the other leads, Danny Aiello, the actress who played Jessie, I think her name is Elizabeth Pena. she's actually just died recently of cirrhosis of the liver. So,
oh, shit.
So maybe this movie kind of haunted her in different ways. But yeah, that's too bad for that. But yeah, it's did an okay job in terms of the acting. The story, though, I think they just tipped their hand too much early on. When you say it's ahead of its time, I partially agree. Even though I can't think of other movies off the top of my head, I'm sure there are other movies about the transition from life to death out there. It's just, I just don't know of them. I'd be surprised if this was one of the first to do that in this fashion. Talking about, like, they're not telling the audience what's happening until the end. I don't think that this would be the first, but it's probably one of the earlier ones because this movie is pretty well known. A lot of people do recommend this movie, but I found that they just, I kept saying, is they've just tipped their hand too early. I just felt that if they played it a bit more coy throughout the movie, they threw in this drug thing in the middle of the movie instead of the lawyer, I think it would have kept me guessing a bit more because I kind of solved the movie too early on for me to have any enjoyment afterwards or have any surprise. I also felt that the editing and the pacing and the directing, as we talked about, the more deft hand or skilled hand, I think the director could have done a better job here. And I was slightly disappointed in the fact that this was the movie that we got. I thought we'd have a slightly more different take on what Jacob's Ladder was. Me not knowing what the biblical reference of Jacob's Ladder is. I didn't find this really to be too much of a thriller. I felt this was kind of just ho-hum. Like when I see my wife watching shitty TV movies, this is it. Like that guy who's transitioning from fucking life to death is going through certain stages and meeting his fucking parents and talking to other people and dealing with demons and shit like that. This is a weekly Lifetime Movie of the Week award. It feels like that when I watch this movie now. I get this. It has nothing to do with budget. I think that some of the more disturbing images there's some certain sequences that are done very, very well. Like you talk about the party scene, you talk about the hospital scene, you talk about the subway scene. These are excellent sequences, but 3 sequences in a movie does not a movie make. So I'm just left wanting more out of this movie, and I didn't get it.
Are you disappointed with what's actually, like, are you disappointed with the fact that it is merely him transitioning from life into death, from earth to heaven with some purgatory in between? Like, is that what's disappointing? You wanted it to be a larger concept than that?
I think so. Maybe I had some preconceived notions of what Jacob's Ladder was, to be honest, and it ended up just being something as simple of a concept as this, even though I'm sure in the grand scheme of life in the cosmic universe, that's not simple. We cannot answer that. So it's a fascinating discussion topic, but I don't find what was presented to me all that fascinating because, as I said, I pretty much guessed it right off the bat.
Yeah.
And then they kept reinforcing it, even though they kind of added a couple of twists and turns, they kept reinforcing it immediately. Oh, you're dead.
Yeah. Well, they do, because they tell, I mean, how many times does he get told straight up, you're dead?
Yeah.
He gets told that straight up at least 3-4 times.
And the funny thing is every time when he's with his girlfriend, Jezzy, there's always something off in terms of hell. You get those hellish images. You get that party scene.
Yeah.
You get him dying close to death in the bathtub. Then when he's recuperating, we didn't talk about this. There's a scene where he goes, "Are you okay?" Like she goes up to him, "Are you okay?" Because he's just kind of spacing out in his apartment, and her eyes look demonic at that point. He's having a little visual. And then she's at the hospital, that demon hospital, and she's one of the doctors there. And then another doctor says, "No, you're dead." So every time I see stuff with her, I'm saying he's in hell or he's about to die. He's going through that process.
Well, I kind of wondered, because you're absolutely right, she seems like she's kind of a high maintenance girlfriend too. You know, she's hot, but she needs some fucking maintenance. Like, you know, you're taking a full mechanics kit into the bedroom with you with that chick. Like,
yeah, the minute she burned the pictures, even though I get the reference that they were doing the circling around later.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, yeah, what a bitch. Oh, God. She's probably good in bed, but that's about it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you need a socket wrench, some needle nose pliers, a blowtorch. Like, you need some fucking serious tools to deal with that. I wondered why her, you know? Like, it was a pretty real life that he was imagining for himself with this particular woman. And there was no reason why it was her. She was just her. She was there, you know, because it was, you know, it's kind of a specific dream for him to have. But
then as, Louis said, demons are tearing away at his life. So the high maintenance demonic girlfriend is there because he's not letting go of his actual wife.
Well, yeah,
she is the replacement of that, making his life miserable until he's ready to accept death.
Yeah, that's true. That makes sense, except some of her behavior betrays that. When he's losing his mind, he's about to die from the fever, she's frantic, trying to save him, right? In a genuine, not in a selfish way, but what seemed to be a genuine way, which is interesting because if he's dreaming and he's unconscious, it's always it's a tough point for me when we're seeing things that aren't taking place in reality, right? This is a dream for him, right? But he's unconscious basically in the bathtub. And she goes out into the hall and she's knocking on doors trying to get ice. This isn't something that he sees happen. So we're led to believe it, but the problem here is the consistency. I think there's just a lack of consistency from the director. Exactly. Painting these characters. But again, maybe he didn't want to tip that hand also. You're exactly right. They don't want to tip the hand, but they're not being honest to us because this is something that's not actually happening. So we shouldn't be seeing it unless he's seeing it. It's a problem with, they kind of do the same thing in Total Recall. If they want us to believe that he's dreaming the whole thing, he shouldn't be able to see shit that's happening when he's not on screen because it's all memories, right? So this is sort of in the same vein as that. We shouldn't be able to see stuff that's going on if he's not there. There's a sort of another scene when all of his army buddies are on the other end of the phone, like they're all kind of in a group. And because he's called one of them, like, why are you backing out? And they're all on the other end of the line. And we see that as the audience, but he's not, like, they're not actually there. It's all a fucking dream. So he can't see that either. We shouldn't be seeing that, right? Do you know what I mean? So you're right. It's an inconsistency with the film. And when you're doing a psychological thriller and you make missteps like this, it hurts the whole thing because it bursts the bubble. Yeah. And you can't burst the bubble when you're doing a psychological thriller. No, for sure. Do you have anything else to talk about, or do you want to wrap up your final thoughts here? No, I think I got in everything I need to get in. All right. No, excellent. So, Geoff, do you recommend Jacob's Ladder? What are your final thoughts here? I'm going to give it a moderate recommendation. It's definitely not a strong recommendation. But it's not a rare antiquity, or is it? Okay, let me go through the thoughts here. So I'll give it a moderate recommendation, and the reason I'll give it a moderate recommendation is, there's some cool shit going on here. Some of the imagery is really good. I think that even for all the mistakes it makes, it does a lot really well if we take a look at the genre of the psychological thriller. I think it creates the right atmosphere. I didn't have a problem with the pacing as you did, and even though it kind of drops the ball, I think it's still a good example of a psychological thriller, if not a great example. Is it a rare antiquity? I don't know. I mean, it's I have trouble thinking of like a movie that it's it's doing some different stuff here, but I don't know. Honestly, I did not have my mind made up before because I couldn't quite, I was kind of waffling, but I think it's probably not quite a rare antiquity, but it's a kind of a neat watch. So moderate recommendation, not a rare antiquity. I mostly agree with that. Although I think I'm going to go on to the slight underside of where that, faint line of recommend, not recommend is. It is not a rare antiquity by any means, but I think I'm going to go with almost a recommend, but not quite there, just simply because the movie is not bad by any means. It's just not strong enough for me to say, watch this, because I think other movies have done this kind of trickery better and this kind of psychological drama better. You go and talk about other horror movies or thrillers, Sixth Sense being one that's just off the top of my head. That's something I think that was done a lot better at the time, even though I think that's slightly an overrated movie, but I'm just talking about in comparison. There are some neat things that are done here. The acting is not bad, but the acting is not superb. It's right where it kind of needs to be. It's passable. It's serviceable. The direction is okay. There are some 2 or 3 really strong sequences in this movie that piqued my interest and made me go, oh, fuck yeah, this is going to be good. Mm-hmm. And then it just immediately lets me down right after. We talked about the pacing of this movie. I don't have time to digest anything or think about anything or let anything sink in, because the minute something happens, it's negated 20 seconds later, or it's
something else on top of that 20 seconds later. And I don't have time to enjoy that one piece. What does that mean? And then it tipped its hand so early, and it kept reinforcing the fact that he was dead. That any other twist saying that no, wait a minute, it might be something else. Oh yeah, okay, let me sit with that. But 20 seconds later, no, you're dead again. So I really didn't have time to enjoy any of these other nuances or layers they kept adding on to the movie. And to me, it just felt like, Showtime Network movie of the week kind of movie. That's what it ended up being, unfortunately, for me. Maybe give it a watch, but I can't quite put it into the recommend column here this time. Unfortunately, I was really looking forward to this movie. I kept hearing good things about it. Unfortunately, it didn't pan out for me.
Be interesting to see what this movie would be like in the hands of a slightly more seasoned filmmaker, like another pass on the script and, a director who just has a little more deft hand. I think there's probably some good stuff here that could really be serviced better by a little bit more skill. Yeah,
it's too bad. So that does it for today's episode, Jeff, unless you have anything else to add about Jacob's Ladder.
You talked about The Sixth Sense, and I agree. I think it's overrated, but it does a pretty good job of not tipping its hand. If you go back and watch it after the first, most people don't get it on the first watch. You don't see the twists coming. But if you go back and watch it knowing that that's what happens, it's all right there.
Right.
That's the sign of a better the thriller. Yeah, of a better filmmaker.
Better script.
Knowing a better script and knowing exactly how to play it so that it's not obvious until at the end and you're like, oh, of course. And then you go back, watch it again, and you're like, oh, it's right here in front of me. I mean, that's really tough to do. So credit to M. Night Shyamalan, and really the only credit you can give the guy, unfortunately, that is tough to do. So I can kind of cut these guys a break on this film because it's almost impossible to do it right. But yeah, I mean, it would be neat to see if they, in the hands of somebody who had a little bit more capability to pull this off.
Yeah. No, I think so. Yeah, so that does it today. For today's episode 16, Jacob's Ladder. Jeff, care to enlighten anybody who dares listen to us? What is next on our plates?
It is the greatest gladiator match in the history of the planets. We've got up next our foray back into the mainstream, Batman v Superman x Wonder Woman Sunrise of Justice, or whatever the fuck the movie's called, on our next episode. It could be our longest one yet. Who knows?
Maybe. I take it you've seen it.
Yeah, I've seen it. You've seen it.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm ready to go whenever you are on that one. So that'll be an interesting discussion.
One way or another, it'll be a good episode for us to do.
Yeah. For the 0 people who actually listen to this, aside from ourselves, I recommend listening to episode 5, where we delved into the Superman franchise and also discussed Man of Steel and our hopes and fears of Batman v Superman. So take a listen to that before you listen to the next episode, if you dare. And Jeff, I guess I'll see you on the other side.
Yeah. All right, man. We'll catch you on the flip side, and thanks for doing this.
All right. Cheers. You have a good night.
All right.